Image size and applying your club rules. Now, what I'm about to quote are real club rules taken from the internet this morning, midway through February 2015. So I've just taken these directly from a club who will remain nameless. Digital images should be submitted at 1920 pixels in width and 1080 pixels in height. Now, I have to say that I think that is very badly worded. It seems to indicate that the images it says should be submitted at 1920 pixels in width and 1080 pixels in height. That's not exactly what it means. It means that the digital images shouldn't be any longer than 1920 pixels in width or 1080 pixels in height, but it doesn't prevent you putting in a picture which is 1920 pixels in width, but in actual fact only 500 pixels in height. Now, I don't think we can spend any time here debating club rules with regard image size, because we could be here all day. Your club, in fact, may require the images to be no longer on the width at 1400 pixels and maybe no higher than 1050 pixels. Now, some clubs with an older projector may still be stipulating a file size no longer than 1024 pixels and no higher than 768 pixels. But why do clubs stipulate these what appear to be odd pixel values, 1920 by 1080, 1400 by 1050, 1024 768, one I saw was 1920 by 1200. Let's go into Photoshop and I'll show you a graphic and explain why they do this. Now, what you're looking at the moment is my mock-up of a camera club screen. As you can see, we have a nice textured wall, we have the cylinder at the top where we just pull the screen down. It just so happens that this screen happens to be designed in 16:9 format. Most of the projectors that we use in our camera clubs have a typical resolution, and it's that resolution which is going to define the image size rules your club puts in place. In the rules of the club I was quoting a little while ago, the one that shall remain nameless, they went on to offer some guidance by saying the following. If the image is landscape format, then the width must be 1920 pixels wide and let the height take care of itself as long as the height doesn't exceed 1080 pixels. If the image is portrait format, then the height must be 1080 pixels, size the image to suit and let the width take care of itself. We'll explain this term a little bit later. It goes on to say the image should be not smaller and not larger. Failure to submit images using the correct dimensions may result in the images not being accepted for judging. For demonstration purposes, I've just turned the lights off in the club room and I've selected an image to be projected onto the screen. Now, this particular image, being that it's a landscape format, has been pre-sized to the size that this particular club states, which happens to be the same as my own club. 1920 pixels on the long side and 1080 pixels in height. Now, the one problem we may have with doing this, not in this instance because we have a seascape and it's very easy to crop a little bit of the image to get that nice widescreen format. One thing that can confuse the issue a little bit is the fact that most of the images we get from our digital cameras, particularly SLRs, are in 3:2 aspect ratio or format, which doesn't fit neatly into the 16:9 aspect ratio we're looking at here. And that's why the rules I read out a little bit earlier on said that the width must be 1920 pixels wide and let the height take care of itself. We'll explain and demonstrate this in a moment, as long as the height doesn't exceed 1080. It's because we're trying to fit a more square shape into the oblong format that our projector uses. Now, we don't have to, of course. If I wanted to put a long slim image into the competition, of course I could do so. But let's do something now which is pretty typical. Let's open up an image from a typical digital SLR that has not been cropped. It's been worked through Camera Raw or whatever editing you want to give it, but now we're ready to get it to the right size for the Camera Club competition. Here I have a typical image from a digital SLR. I'm not so much concerned about how many pixels are in the width and how many are in the height. It's the aspect ratio that I want to draw your attention to. So coming from a digital SLR, this image is 3:2. We can go to the image and the image size menu, and just to test that, if we really wanted to, we could just put 3 pixels in the width box. We don't have to commit this, and if it's 3:2, then because the width and height is linked here, it tells us immediately that this is in fact a 3:2 format. Hold the Alt key, and many of the panels in Photoshop, you'll notice the cancel button changes to a reset, so I can set it back to how the panel opened. So remember what the Camera Club rules stated. It stated that we can make the width 1920 pixels. Now we do have many other ways to measure the image, but just by chance it happened to come up with pixels, but if yours don't, just select them. And this is the same within Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. So in the width I can click and drag and overtype that with 1920. Now remember what the rule said is make the width 1920, allow the height to take care of itself as long as the height isn't greater than 1080. Well, here it clearly is. Now the reason the height has come up greater than 1080 is simply because we're taking a 3:2 aspect or format image from our camera, and what we're trying to do is to squeeze it into a 16:9 aspect ratio shape. Now we can do that, but we would need to crop some of the image at the top and the bottom. So in this scenario, all we need to do is to resize the width at 1920, take a quick look at the height. If the height is below 1080, then fine, we can click OK, and we're OK to submit that image to the competition. If the height comes out greater than 1080, then just highlight that and reduce that to 1080, and because the height is linked to the width naturally is going to go down to 1620. When we click OK, I'll hit Ctrl 0, we get a perfect image, meets the club rules, and we haven't affected the format or aspect ratio at all. Now on club night, when the image is projected up onto the screen, you can see that the dark area around the edge is showing us that the screen is actually a 16:9 aspect ratio, or the shape that the projector can project is 16:9, but the image can't quite meet that. But nevertheless, all is well. We're using the maximum amount of the screen we possibly can before we start to think about cropping the image. When dealing with a portrait format image like this one, if we do the same as we did a few moments ago, image size, if I were, and this would be quite wrong, but if I were to put a width of 1920 pixels, you can see because we have a portrait format, the height is going to be massively over what the club rules stipulate. I'm going to hold the Alt key. You'll notice that the cancel button changes to a reset. So when the image appears on screen, if we're resizing for a portrait format or aspect ratio, then the important one to change here is the height, allowing the width to take care of itself again those words that were in the club rules, 1080, and the width now is well within what we're allowed to put on screen. Now let me click OK to that. It's going to go small. I'll hit Control 0, but let me show you how that's going to be viewed on the screen through the club's projector. And that's how it's going to be viewed. Both of those images meet the club's needs, no problem at all. There is another alternative, probably more relative to landscape format images. Now here you'll recognise the image we had on screen a little while ago. It's the high resolution 3:2 format image. If we go to image size, we'll just have a quick recap. There's the size of the image. If we make it 1920, we cannot match the height we need, so we adjusted it previously to 1080, but the width ended up at 1620. Let's do this in a different way. What we can use is the crop tool. Because this is a landscape format, and because the picture is of a content that would take a bit of cropping, we can do this. So when the image content is of a type which allows this, we can go to the crop tool. In the values at the top of the screen, we can put in 1920 or whatever pixel value your club depicts as the size you need to use. 1080 pixels, and there you can see instantly the difference between a 16:9 aspect ratio as shown to us here by that crop bounding box and the 3:2 aspect ratio that we can see slightly showing to us at the top and bottom, which is the part of the picture we would have to remove. Now I can choose to cut some off the top, some off the bottom, or a larger part off the top or a larger part off the bottom, but the content of the image is going to determine that. If I were to crop tight along the bottom, we're going to lose an unacceptable section on the top. If I went the other way, that's a possible, but I think the image is slightly low in the frame. So I'm going to move it up. Looking at my composition, I'm going to take the building up as high as I can, and I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to hit the tick on the options bar, then we'll take a look at this at full size, but what we need to do is to take a look at this and perhaps in conjunction with the 3:2 format and see how they're going to be viewed in the club room on the screen. There's not going to be a massive difference, but with some images it can have quite an impact. Now when we see the image projected in the club room at 16:9 aspect ratio, it just has a little better presence than the 3:2 format. Let's take a look and switch between the two. So we've got two methods to meet Camera Club rules about size. We can use image size. In some cases we can use the crop tool. But the crop tool system isn't going to work in all scenarios, and it's going to depend on the content of the image. Take this one for example. Because it's been so tightly framed within the picture space, if I was to try to use the crop tool option here to use 1920 1080, you can see I've got a little bit of a problem. I've either got to lose the outer focus petal going off at the top there or the sharp one down here. Now of course you've always got choices. You can always move the picture around and position it something like that. You could choose that, but I just raised this one to show you that some content in some images is not going to lend itself that well to the crop tool method. So if we wanted everything in this image to be used, then we would be using the image size, and we would be making the maximum use of the height once again, allowing the width to take care of itself. So although we've met the Camera Club rules, we cannot meet the maximum size the projector allows, and we're going to have a little bar down the left and right. So whichever method you choose is always going to be a judgment call that you need to make yourself. Every month in our Camera Club competitions there's at least 3 images that have not been resized at all. The author has probably been rushing right at the last minute and they've submitted the image, maybe the wrong thumbnail, but the image is high resolution like the one I have here. Let's look into the image size, and they're going to be sending an image which is something like 36 megabyte in size, although of course it will be smaller than that saved as a JPEG. The other common problem is they get fixated on the width, so we change the width to 1920, we hit the OK button, not noticing that the height is way above what the rules state. One of the most disappointing mistakes made is when an author has a good image and makes a mistake and presents it far smaller than it really needs to be. Remember that old saying, a good big image always beats a good small image? I usually see this happen at least 3 times every month and sometimes 6 times. Now the author does have a much higher resolution image, so there is no doubt that this is a mistake. So the judge gets to judge this image rather than this one. Here I have the same image in Lightroom, and I am not certain of course, but here's one speculation on why that may be. In Lightroom of course, once we're going to export our image for a Camera Club competition, then we generally right click and we choose Export. Now I don't intend to go through the exporting of files through Lightroom here. I've already done that with an extensive list of videos which cover all aspects of Lightroom 5, particularly the export panel we're looking at. But if I just take you to the image size, we can export images at a set size. And what we can also do is create presets, user presets. Now what I think happens is an author completes the work on an image and once again, maybe because they're rushing, they export the file through Lightroom, not realizing that they've either hit the wrong user preset if they've made any, but more likely they haven't looked at the image size that they use last, and that will be retained and used in the image they've just exported. So in our case, if I export my image here, it's going to be much smaller than I've got the opportunity to use in the club competition. However, if we just cancel this, let me point you to one option you have in Lightroom. If we select the crop overlay, and we're dealing here with aspect ratios of 16:9, if we go to this option here, click and hold, you can see that we have 3 values which are going to be close to what most people are going to need. There's the old one I was referring to before. Here we have a 1610, which I suppose would fit some of the older laptops, but we do actually have here, look, one already set up for 16:9 at the resolution we want. So if the image we're using is one that would stand a crop, we can select that. Now you can see my crop has changed, but you can see I can also move my crop around and actually tighten up the composition of this image before clicking done and then exporting that so it fills the entire frame. But once again, be careful when you export to make sure you don't mistakenly pick up a much smaller size than you need.